Dave Ramsey from 6 till 9 on News Talk KVNU 102 FM and 610 AM.
KVNU News Time is 5:05. I'm Bill Walter with this news update brought to you by Roof Rescue. Cash Makers hosts a multitude of volunteer-led youth groups focused on science, technology, engineering, and math in our valley, and they have been a great resource for families to keep young minds busy at home over the last couple of years. On KVNU's For the People program on Monday, 4-H Youth STEAM Program Coordinator Jenny Curl said the program is going strong into 2022.
We have a ton of stuff planned for the upcoming year, and it's not only after school, but it's during school, and we also work with the after-school outreach programs, and then also here at Cash Makers.
Curl said it's not just for kids, but adults are encouraged to get involved as they are always looking for volunteers. She said the great thing is they can jump right in and be engaged and do the fun activities along with the children.
We are very much like the Boy Scouts, but we always make sure that we have at least 2 adults working with 2 kids, and so that we're never just having just one adult. And so if they're interested, they just need to go onto our website, which is 4h.z, as in zebra, sweet.org, and you fill out the application on there and just let them know that you would like to become a volunteer. We do background checks on all of our volunteers.
And you can learn more about what they have scheduled for this year at cashmakers.org. KVNU News Time is 5:06. KVNU weather for tonight. Partly cloudy this evening, then mostly cloudy. Overnight low 0 to 5 above. Mostly cloudy Wednesday morning and then becoming partly cloudy. High temperature near 20. Partly cloudy Thursday, near 20 for the high. Our high temperature this afternoon has been 25. It's 24 right now at KVNU. KVNU weather brought to you by Berenson Caldwell. Have you been in an accident? Contact Berenson Caldwell for professional legal advice. Visit berensonlaw.com to instantly connect and receive a free case review of your injury. berensonlaw.com.
If you think it's expensive to hire a professional, just wait until you hire an amateur.
Why the heck is the roof leaking? Larry, you said you got it fixed.
I thought it was fixed, Donna. Everything was fine until it started raining.
Larry, that's the point of fixing the roof, is so we can actually live here when it's stormy outside.
This is David with Roof Rescue. Our experienced roofing team is tried and true and will fix your roof guaranteed. Visit roofrescueusa.com to schedule your free roof inspection. Roof Rescue, providing watertight peace of mind.
KVNU News Time is 5:08. A woman has died after a hunting incident in Summit County. KUTV reports deputies were called out to reports of a gunshot wound and hunting accident at around 11 o'clock Monday morning. A family of 3 from Salt Lake County was hunting elk in the area near mile marker 178 off the south side of Interstate 80. Deputies said a 58-year-old woman got into a UTV side-by-side where a firearm was stored. They said the woman's entry into the UTV caused the firearm to move and discharge. Lieutenant Andrew Wright with the Summit County Sheriff's Office said the woman was shot in the midsection. He said deputies and medical responders attempted life-saving measures, but the woman was pronounced dead on the scene. No other injuries were reported. Deputies are still investigating that incident. And sheriff's deputies in north central Idaho shot and killed a man that they said was armed with a knife early Monday morning. The Clearwater County Sheriff's Office identified the man as 48-year-old Michael Trappett. The sheriff's office said deputies went to a home near Orofino, Idaho, early Monday for a report of an aggressive and intoxicated man armed with a knife. They found him outside. The sheriff's office said he acted aggressively, did not respond to verbal commands, and was shot by one of the deputies. Both of the deputies were wearing body cameras. That footage will be turned over to the Lewiston Police Department, which is investigating. KVNU News Time is 5:09. For more details on these and other stories, visit CashValleyDaily.com.
Jessup Insurance and Retirement Services. Medicare is different for every individual, never a one-plan-fits-all. Jessup Insurance guides you through all the appropriate steps, plus is there for future questions and concerns. Call Jessup Insurance, 435-213-3200, or Google Jessup Insurance.
Jessup Insurance and Retirement Services. Let us guide you.
Hi, this is Gordon Deal. Wednesday on This Morning, America's First News. As you might imagine, Ukrainian Americans are in constant touch with family and friends in Ukraine to gauge their concerns about Russia, hear what they're saying. Also, as you may have noticed on social media, on cable TV, or in your own conversations, we've become terrible listeners when it comes to opposing views and the rules for landing a job in 2022. Wednesday on This Morning, America's First News. From 4 to 6 on News Talk KVNU, 610 AM and 102 FM. Your station for news and talk.
Every year, dozens of first responders and police are injured or killed while assisting motorists on the side of busy highways. And hundreds of people are killed changing tires or stopping for other reasons. Most drivers are unaware that the law in all 50 states says that when you see flashing lights, you're required to slow down and move to the next lane. Failing to obey these laws can result in fines and criminal charges if someone is injured. So if you see a police car, ambulance, tow truck, fire truck, or any emergency vehicle on the side of the road, slow down to at least 20 miles per hour below the speed limit and move to the next lane. And if you think you need to pull over to the side of the road, do so only if it's an emergency, and never pull over to the median side of the highway. Park as far from the highway as possible. Turn on your hazard lights, make sure all passengers get out of the vehicle, and light flares if you have them. And don't risk your life trying to change a flat tire on a dangerous highway. Carefully drive to the nearest exit. To learn more, visit nationalpolice.org.
Feels like Tuesday. Tuesday has no feel.
Welcome back to KVNU's For the People. Hour 2 of today's show, Tuesday, February 1st. I'm Jason Williams, Bill Walter here in the studio as well, and it is time for this month's installment of the For the People Book Club with our good friend Craig Petersen here in the studio with us. This month we'll be talking about a book called Beneath a Scarlet Sky by Mark Sullivan, a Bozeman, Montana author that has written a very, very popular novel, a historical novel that is about to become a movie with Tom Holland, and it is based on actual events, or at least that's how it's billed. And as we were discussing, Craig, before it started, the man at the center of this story, this World War II story, is still alive. 96 years old, lives in Milan, Italy. It's rare that you get a chance to read a historical fiction based on true events novel that's centered on someone who you could actually call up and say, "Is this what happened?" Yeah, but you've done that. You just read that.
Although evidently at 96, he's not quite as able to do that as he used to. His son said he's now suffering from dementia. So,
oh, that's too bad.
He's 96. Give him a break.
96. He's earned it. Yeah. He's earned some fantasy, right? Oh, man. I'm excited to hear you talk about this one today because this is a bit out of the typical for you. It's you traditionally read straight up nonfiction. This is how do we refer to this?
That's kind of what I wanted to start talking about. So in terms of historical books, there's historical nonfiction where the author tries to accurately recreate a real event. For example, The Right Stuff about the moon landing. Michael McCullough's 1776 about that year in the war. Kind of related to this, the Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, which is a monumental 1,000-page book that tries to document everything that happened.
Literally meant as a textbook.
Exactly. It's actually a great book. I read that.
It's a long read.
It is a long read. Hamilton, the books, the Doris Kearns Goodwin's books on the Roosevelts.
Sure. And then sometimes they read like fiction, even though they're not. You recommended a couple of years ago when we started doing this a book on the Wright brothers.
Yeah.
I don't remember the name now.
You know what I mean? It might have been just called The Wright Brothers.
Maybe,
but
it was
a great story.
And that read like a novel.
Yeah,
it read like fiction, but that was investigated historical journalism.
They spend a lot of their lives just suing other people.
It was fascinating.
but anyway, on the other extreme is historical fiction, where the author attempts to recreate the setting as accurate as he can, but then dumps in a fictional story into that. Okay?
Okay.
Now, this book kind of fits between those two. It's what I would refer to maybe as augmented nonfiction, and I'll explain that in just a minute, okay? But just to give a little primer on the book, it's actually an incredibly popular book. It was a #1 bestseller on the New York Times.
Yeah.
Amazon, of course, there are Amazon book reviews. Of all the books they've ever done, this one has 57,000 reviews. It's #6.
Man.
And you mentioned that Spider-Man is going to take on the lead character.
Yeah, he's going to play Pino. Is it Layla? Is that how you pronounce it in
Pino
Italian?
Layla. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, Tom Holland will be playing that role in the film version of Beneath the Scarlet Sky.
But this is what the author says at the beginning of the book about what the book is and the way it's marketed. He says, "I've been forced in places to construct scenes and dialogue based solely on Pino's memory decades later. The scant physical evidence that remains and my imagination fueled by my research and informed suspicions. In certain instances, I've also commingled or compressed events and characters for the sake of narrative coherence, and have fully dramatized incidents that were described to me in a much more truncated form. As a result, then, the story that you read is not a work of narrative nonfiction, but a novel of biographical and historical fiction that comes close to what actually happened between 1943 and 1945. So it's not historical nonfiction, and it's not historical fiction. It's kind of a hybrid
like
in
a
between.
Hybrid.
Yeah,
interesting.
Yeah, he's done the best that he can on
so
the
kind
book.
of that's sort of I hear that as the author saying, look, I'm telling the story of what actually happened, but I've taken some liberties to
Right.
make it flow.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
And he's telling the story to the best of his knowledge as to what actually happened. So he's not being creative in events, but he's relying on other people and other people, in this case, that were relating the story many, many years later. Because when he first encounters Pino is 79.
Wow.
And so this is 60 years after the events happen.
Man.
And so what I'm going to do is talk about the book, but then I also kind of want to talk about the controversy regarding the book, because it's a book that people have loved, but it's also a book that some people said, we're not so sure that it doesn't fall a little bit more to historical fiction than it does historical nonfiction.
Interesting.
Yeah, there's a fairly detailed controversy on that.
That is the novel. It's billed as a novel, which usually applies only to fiction.
Yeah, on the cover it says a novel.
Yeah, it says a novel.
Yeah,
interesting.
But then he's claiming it's events that actually happened. The way that the book evolved is a really interesting story. So, the author back in 2006 is driving at night up in Montana where he lived, and it's a terrible time in his life. In fact, his brother had drunk himself to death a year ago. He's in a business dispute. He's just written a novel that nobody liked, and he's facing personal bankruptcy.
Wow.
And he's actually, in this introduction, he's saying, I'm actually worth more dead than alive. He's contemplating suicide. And then that very night, the very same night, and it's kind of ironic, he says, I prayed for something to happen that would make this be different. And that night he goes to a dinner, and at the dinner there's a guy who begins to talk about this story of this fellow back in Italy during World War II. And the fellow who's telling the story at the dinner said, I thought I'd write a story about this, but I just never was able to do it. And so Mark Sullivan says, tell me about it. You're not going to do it. Can I have a shot at it? And so the guy makes the contact, and Sullivan goes over to Italy and first encounters Pino when he's 79, goes back about 5 times. And this novel, the research for this novel actually evolves over a period of 10 years for him to do it. So he's doing a lot of research. He's going through records and so forth, talking to all kinds of people, and out of that comes the story. But the story actually comes out of the lowest day of his life and becomes a runaway bestseller.
That itself is a fascinating story behind the publication of the novel. That is, for listeners, again, we're talking here on the For the People Book Club about Beneath a Scarlet Sky by Mark Sullivan, a novel with a historical foundation of actual events, including, as Craig just mentioned, decades of interviews with the man this story is centered around, Pino Leila, who is an Italian man, lived still alive today, 96 years old, lives in Milan, Italy. We'll talk about what the book is about right after this.
2022 is all about you. This is Dan at the Sports Academy. It's time to take control of one of the most important parts of your life, your health. Sports Academy offers the largest variety of fitness equipment and group fitness classes like cycling, yoga, high fitness, Zumba, and water aerobics. Classes for all ages and abilities. Take control of your health and experience the difference at the Sports Academy. Your club, your results, your life.
Jill, why don't you tell the class what you did this weekend?
Well, my dad and I went in search of some magical minnows and found a zillion of them in the stream from our lookout rock. Then my sister and I escaped from an evil slug king and went back to my super twig fort for safety. Then we told stories till it got dark, and the Big Dipper led us all the way home.
Where were you, Jill?
We went to the forest. It's not that far away.
Ask your parents to take you and your friends to the forest this week. It's closer than you think. Check out discovertheforest.org. Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service and the Ad Council.
You're who you always were.
She was screaming and crying. I've never seen her like that in my life.
You're who you've always been.
So we ended up calling the doctor, and he said, this isn't just an ear infection.
You always had it in you.
This is our daughter, and we didn't know how to help her.
To fight monsters and win.
Every day, thousands of kids like Gwen enter a Children's Miracle Network hospital. And for many of them, they're fighting for their lives. Children's hospitals are underfunded, which is why these hospitals rely on community support. 100% of contributions made at helpkidstoday.org go to your local member children's hospital so they can spend it on their most urgent needs.
It's life-changing for a kid like Gwen.
We can't change their diagnosis, but together, we're changing their future. For ways to help, visit us at helpkidstoday.org. helpkidstoday.org.
Welcome back to KVNU's For the People Book Club with our good friend Craig Petersen here in the studio this hour. We're talking about sensational bestseller, just through the roof as far as the footprint this book has. It's called Beneath the Scarlet Sky, and it tells a true story of events in World War II and a single man named Pino Leila, L-E-L-L-A. He's Italian, still alive today, 96 years old, lives in Milan, Italy. And this is written by Mark Sullivan, a Bozeman-based author. Soon to become a movie with starring Tom Holland as Pino. And it's being billed as Craig said, not historical fiction, not historical nonfiction, kind of a hybrid of the two. This is a fictionalized version of some real events. But as you set up before the break there's some skepticism about how much of this. So what's the basic plot?
Yeah, let me take you through it all. There are a couple of what's the word? Things that I don't want to tell.
Spoilers.
Spoilers. I couldn't think of the word. Yeah.
No spoilers. Okay, good.
Yeah, there are a couple of spoilers that I'll leave out.
Good, because I haven't read it yet. I bought it, but I haven't read it.
Yeah. Incidentally, this book originally was going to have a name like North of Milan or something like that, and they changed it to Beneath the Scarlet Sky because they thought that would appeal to female readers because it has elements of being a romance in it as well. A big part of this book is kind of a love story.
Oh, okay.
So that's maybe why that's there. But anyway, it goes something like this. So Pino starts out in 1943, and Pino is living in Milan, and Milan was just devastated by the Allies in the bombing. About 400,000 people ended up being homeless as a consequence of the Allied bombing there. But still, the people were anxious for the Allies to come. And the book takes place not too far before the Allies actually did come and liberate Milan. But it starts out, and Pino goes into a bakery, and he meets this girl. And the girl's older than he is, and he's kind of smitten by her, and he invites her out, and she stands him up, and that's kind of the end of it for a little while in the book.
Oh, wow.
And then his parents say, we're going to send you up into the Alps. And there's a monastery up there run by a Father Ray. And Pino goes up there, and Father Ray says, I'm sending you out on hikes every day. And so he sends him out on these terrible hikes to toughen him up.
Wow.
And he's thinking, why, is this kind of a form of penance for sins in my life or something like that? And then one day, Father Ray says, now I think you're ready. And it turns out what Father Ray is doing is he's running an underground railroad. And he is transporting Jews across the Alps into safety in Switzerland. There were about 44,000 Jews in Italy, and actually most of them survived, but there were about 8,000 killed. But the reason they survived is because the Catholic Church and others were very, very involved in protecting the Jews in Italy. And so Pino now has this responsibility. He's a 17-year-old kid, and he's to take these Jews and take them up over the Alps, sometimes in the dead of winter, and down into Switzerland. And there's a guy who meets them there, and once they get to Switzerland, then they're safe. And just one of the stories, it goes through a number of different trips that they took, but one of them, he has to take a woman, and she's pregnant, and she's got a violin that she refuses to give up because she's a violinist.
Okay.
And they take this trek in the dead of winter, and it's like going on the what's the hike down at Zion's, the scary one? Angel's Landing.
Yeah.
It's kind of like Angel's Landing. They put
sneaky scary, too. Yeah. It looks all peaceful, and then,
a little the same thing. But anyway, they start out with her, and they end up hearing something, and they run. There's a little house, that's a trapper's house or something like that. And they manage to get into it, and they're covered by an avalanche, and they have to dig out. And it's kind of a question as to whether or not they'll dig out before they suffocate, and they finally get out. And then the woman, like I said, she's now about to have a miscarriage, or at least she's has some physiological problem, and she can't walk anymore. And one of the things about this is Pino is a great skier. In fact, later in his life, he becomes a ski coach. In fact, he becomes the coach for the Italian Olympic team.
Oh, wow.
And so he says, I'll tell you what, I'll help you out. And so I think of this. These are 1940 skis. He's saying, you get on my back and put your violin behind you, and I'll ski you down out of here. And so he skis down with this woman just clinging to his back. I found myself just a trifle skeptical about that.
That seems. I mean, I guess, but still, a little James Bondy.
Yeah, a little James Bondy. The other thing that happens at this particular part in the book is he's got a cousin up there, and the cousin is a great race driver. In fact, he later becomes a national champion, and that's actually verifiable. But Pino says, I'll tell you what, I'll teach you to ski if you'll teach me to drive. Oh. And so the guy teaches him to drive up there in the mountains. Yeah, and that actually fits into the story a little bit. So anyway, he does that for a little while, and then he's recalled back to Milan, and his dad tells him, we got a problem because of your age, you're going to be conscripted into the German army. And what they're doing with conscripts is they're just sending them to Russia, which is, they're going to march to Moscow, and this is a death sentence. Probably 10% of them would have come back. But they said, but there's an option on this, and that's if you enlist, you can become part of this other group, and this other group does, mainly what they do is they build things. And so he thinks that's a good deal. But now he's wearing basically a German uniform, so he's really identified now as a collaborator.
Okay.
And he's not involved in this very long, and he comes across a car, and it's a German staff car being ridden in by a general, and the car's broken. And he goes up and says, what's the matter? And the driver is kind of a Dummkopf. He doesn't have know anything about cars. And so Pino says, let me see if I can fix your car. And so he fixes the car, and the general on the spot says to this Italian who's now in the army that he knows nothing about, can you drive? And he says, yeah, I'm a great driver. And he says to his existing driver, get lost, you're now going to become my driver. And now he becomes the driver to this German general. And as the book describes, this general is not just a general. He actually is in charge of the operations in Italy and reports not to an underling, but directly to the Fuhrer.
Oh, wow.
And so he's now the driver to the general who's in charge of German operations in in Italy.
Man, what a scary thing, too, to know you're, there under clandestine premise and to be that close to the top.
Yeah, and it turns out he's got an uncle who's a member of the resistance, and they have a short radio, and he becomes basically a spy.
Oh, wow.
And so he's kind of observing what goes on, and the general treats him pretty roughly, but he includes him in a surprising number of things. And so there's a bunch of things that happened as he's the driver. One is that the general has a mistress, and he goes to the place where the mistress lives. That's where the general lives too.
Oh, okay.
To pick up the general. He's instructed to get there at certain times in the morning. Goes there the first day, and the door opens, and it's a maid opening the door, and the maid turns out to be this girl that stood him up a couple of years ago.
Wow.
And so he gets involved in a love affair with her. I won't say anything more about that. But as he has all kinds of experiences with this general, because the general is doing all kinds of things in Italy, one of the things he does on 2 occasions is they go to this compound and they walk in, and the person they're talking to is Mussolini, or El Duce, who is of course the head of Italy at that particular time.
Wow.
And so and he's there, and of course El Duce is speaking Italian. He speaks Italian. He also speaks fluent English. That's another part about this.
Interesting.
Pino speaks good English, not El Duce. But so anyway, he has a couple of encounters with Mussolini. On a number of occasions, the general goes on these inspection trips, and he goes out basically to mines and factories and things like this. And what is happening in those operations is they're basically run by slave labor, that the Germans have conscripted people.
Oh, okay.
Not always Jews, sometimes Italians. And the people are working there in conditions that are just short-term. After a period of time, they're treated so poorly that they die. And so he observes these. On another occasion, they go to a railroad station, and he observes a railway car that's packed with Jews who are on their way to a death camp. So he has all these kind of experiences where he's observing what the Germans are doing, and he has a first-hand observation of this. One of the things that I thought was particularly unsettling, but also quite interesting, is there's a circumstance where some of the resistance assassinate some Germans. And the Germans' reaction to that was always to respond not in kind, but far more in kind. And there's a section of the book where they talk about a policy that the Romans used to use called decimation. And it's a little different, but there's some similarities. What the Romans would do, if they had a unit that wasn't performing very well, they'd stand all the soldiers up and they'd have them count off 1 through 10, pick out every 10th soldier, and then require the rest of the unit to kill the 10th soldiers. And the idea being, you better shape up. Yeah. But they did a little bit the same thing in Italy, not quite the same in the sense that they didn't have the soldiers doing it. They weren't assassinating their own people. But they went into the prisons and lined up the prisoners, again, had them count off, and killed them. Killed every 10th one of them. There was something I read that I found kind of interesting because of all the atrocities that the Germans did. Of course, the death camps were the worst, but this kind of decimation policy was the one that they used not too infrequently. And there's a story about a town called Lidice. It's in Czechoslovakia. And there was a German, fairly high-ranking German officer, and he was driving his car, and he was assassinated by a couple of resistance fighters.
Oh, wow.
And this little town of Lidice, it's a town of about 500 people, was nearby. There was no evidence that Lidice was really connected to this. But Hitler, when he found out about this, was just infuriated. And so what he did is he sent in his soldiers. They took all the men in the village, about 200 men, lined them up, and just shot them. Took all the women and children in the village. Some of the children who were kind of, had the German look to them, they were placed with German families, and the rest of them were taken to concentration camps.
Wow.
Once they'd done that, they took this village of about 500, and they obliterated it from the face of the earth. There's no sign of that right now. They covered it with topsoil. And this was done as a reprisal. The Germans had this notion of the value of a bad reputation, that if people know how we're going to respond, then they're going to be less likely to take actions against us.
Sure. So the more brutal the
more brutal it is,
a strategy of theirs.
Well, about that point, the Allies the liberation of Italy occurred before of course, the liberation of Germany. And so the Allies are coming in, and the Germans realize they're going to be routed. And so now things are in an uproar. And at one point, he's kind of walking the streets, and there's a street demonstration. And what's happening there is that Mussolini's there. And I don't know if you remember the story of what happened to Mussolini, but basically, Mussolini was taken, they shot him, he and his mistress, and then they hung him up by their feet, and they just hung him there for several days and mutilated their bodies. And so he describes having seen the death of Mussolini. Later on, he actually, working with kind of the resistance, he's given weapons, and he actually arrests the general that he's been the driver for.
Oh.
And so he takes him and turns him into the Allies. And then, once that happens, he gets a request from the American colonel nearby and says, "I got a job for you." And the job is he's to take this German general that he's been the driver for, and he's to take and drive him to Switzerland. And this general evidently has information. One of the things in the book that it talks about is this general talks about how I do favors for people. And when I do favors for people, then I can expect favors in return. And apparently he had worked it out, so he'd worked out kind of a deal for himself. And so they have to drive him through German lines, actually, and get him into Switzerland. And they have an opportunity where they could kill him. They decide not to kill him and so forth. And there's kind of an interesting twist there, but I won't talk about that. But it's interesting that he would be the one that would be assigned to drive this general to Switzerland, just he and another guy. I think it's actually he and his brother. No, he and his friend that were allowed to do it.
And so I'm starting to see where maybe some healthy skepticism started to creep in.
A lot of things happen to one person.
All these things, this guy happening to be in the right place at the right time possible, but we're talking about a novel based on actual historical events called Beneath a Scarlet Sky by author Mark Sullivan. He's a Bozeman-based author, and this book has been an international bestseller it was on the New York Times bestseller list for, I think, a little over a year. It's about to become a movie starring Tom Holland. It sold millions of copies. We're talking about it, both the plot, the author, and the controversy around the book that has kind of erupted since its publication. What's true, what isn't? We'll keep the conversation going with our friend Craig Petersen here in the studio for the For the People Book Club right after the news with KVNU's Bill Walter.
Thank you, Jason. KVNU News Time is 5:37. The news is brought to you by Mount Logan Laundry. An independent candidate challenging Senator Mike Lee raised more than the incumbent Republican in the final quarter of 2021, setting the stage for a costly Senate race in Utah, where sitting Republicans typically cruise to victory. Campaign finance filings for the 3 months, for the final 3 months of last year, show that McMullen raised more than $1 million, which is almost double Lee's haul. However, he begins the midterm election with less than half the campaign funds of Lee, who raised more over the course of 2021. Republicans account for more than half the electorate in Utah, and the state has been represented by 2 Republican senators since 1977. The Utah House passed a proposal today to increase fees on requests for public records from so-called vexatious requesters. The Deseret News reports the bill would allow government entities to charge for the first 15 minutes of work that's done to fulfill the request if the person has filed a separate request in the previous 10 days. Some supporters of the bill have referred to vexatious requesters and one lawmaker referred to a media outlet using that term. They say it would give agencies more time to fulfill requests without limiting the number of requests. Opponents say the bill sends a bad message to the public. After big wins against San Diego State and Nevada, the Aggie men's basketball team tries to go for their 3rd straight win versus Air Force tonight at 7 o'clock in the Spectrum. Al Lewis and former Aggie great Jalen Moore will break it down on game day at 6, and then be back after the game here on KBNU, 6:10 a.m. or 102.1 FM. KBNU News Time is 5:40.
The colder weather is here. Are your quilts and blankets looking dingy? Is your winter coat or jacket dirty enough to stand in the corner just by itself? Well, go to Mount Logan Laundry. It'll take no time at all to freshen up everything. They have the 55 and 80-pound washers, the biggest around, and great big dryers, too, and it costs a whole lot less than dry cleaning. Free Wi-Fi and drop-off service. Mount Logan Laundry really is the cleanest spot in town, on the corner of 5th East, 9th North in Logan, or in Brigham at 1st East, 7th South. Mount Logan Laundry.
KBNU weather for tonight, partly cloudy, then mostly cloudy overnight, low 0 to 5 above, and then mostly cloudy to start the day tomorrow, becoming partly cloudy, and a high temperature near 20. Partly cloudy on Thursday, near 20 for the high. It's been to 25. Right now it's 21 at KBNU. KBNU weather is brought to you by Roof Rescue. Even if you are denied by your insurance company the first time you receive a quote to fix your roof, a free reevaluation can be made. Visit roofrescueusa.com to schedule your free consultation. That's roofrescueusa.com. Roof Rescue, providing watertight peace of mind. For more details on these and other stories, visit cachevalleydaily.com.
This is Police Chief Gary Jensen from Logan City Police Department. A number of scams are occurring throughout our city and county. These scams are highly emotional and demand immediacy that you pay, and you pay now. They will say they are from the IRS, the Sheriff's Office, the Police Department, utility companies, medical facilities, or even romance scams. The scammers do their homework. They can do a simple check on the internet of your name and find out where you live, where you used to live, even people that are associated with your name. They are always highly emotional phone calls that demand immediate payment or something bad will happen. Slow down and diffuse by asking questions. If they want you to pay with Bitcoin or gift cards, this is a scam. Be careful. Hang up the phone call is the best thing that you can do. Again, slow down and think. React by hanging up, and don't become a victim.
Welcome back to KVNU's For the People. It's the book club, this month's installment with our guest Craig Petersen here in the studio, talking about a book billed as fiction based on true events. It's called Beneath a Scarlet Sky, written by Bozeman author Mark Sullivan. It's been an international bestseller. It's soon to be a movie starring Tom Holland. It's based on a man who is real and still alive, actually 96 years old, lives in Milan, Italy. Man named Pino Leia. I know how to pronounce it, and my brain still wants to put those L's in there. Yeah. So as we've discussed so far, the plot of the book almost seems unbelievable. Some of this man being in the right place at the right time during World War II to be a part of these major events. Possible, though, right? I mean,
sure.
And the author admits he's taken some liberties to make it a fast-paced narrative. He's combined events into one. He's combined people into one character that maybe never existed, and that's not uncommon,
and he's
right?
created dialogue.
Sure, because he wasn't there, right?
Sure, sure.
But billed as a historical fiction, or talked about as historical fiction, in that it tells the story of. So, what do we know actually happened for sure?
Well, we know there was I mentioned the Catholic priest who ran the monastery and helped the Jews get into Switzerland. That really happened.
So that part's true. Okay.
I mentioned that he had this cousin who taught him to drive, who became a world-class driver. That actually happened.
Okay.
His brother was in the resistance. That actually happened. He was a driver, although there's some controversy as to who he actually drove for. In fact, the historical record suggests that it might have been another general who was not quite as prominent. But you know, I mean, the records could be wrong. There are all kinds of things could happen like that. One of the bottom lines on this is this is a great book. It's a page turner. You'll learn a huge amount about what happened in Italy at that period in time, even if there are some minor discrepancies. Let me just, again, the thing that kind of leads me to a little skeptical is that so much can happen to one person, and it actually gets worse. And so, and there are two spoilers that I've left out of this that I'm not going to talk about right now. One of them has to do with his girlfriend, and the other has to do with the general. But after this happens, as I mentioned, he becomes a ski instructor. He comes to the United States. He sells Ferraris. There's a story in the book how he was sitting in a bar in Aspen, and he was drinking with a guy named Gary and a guy named Ernest. And it turns out that they are Gary Cooper and Ernest Hemingway.
Wow.
Talks about him having tried to sell Ferraris to James Dean. He married an heiress and lived a jet-set life. That's verifiable. It really happened. But
sure.
You know, the fact that he'd be drinking with Gary Cooper and Ernest Hemingway, I find it just a little bit skeptical.
At the same time.
And this is one of the ones that really bothered me most. He had a flight, and he was supposed to fly apparently to Scotland. I'm not sure exactly where it was, but he was originally booked on Pan Am Flight 103. 103 is a famous flight because it was shot down by Omar Gaddafi. And apparently, at the last moment, he booked another flight. And so it kind of goes to this whole notion of how can so many things happen to one particular guy.
Yeah.
You know?
That's there's a it almost has a which we know was fiction. It sort of has a Forrest Gump feel to it.
Very much so, yeah.
You know, Forrest Gump was the whole point of that character, fictional, you know, entirely fictional, was that he was in all of these places during all these historical events. And I'm remembering that as you're telling, you know, of the plot of the book. I still want to read it, though. And you mentioned, you know, learning about some of the things that were going on in Italy during that time. That's a lesser known aspect of you know, the Nazi campaign and the weird politics around all of that.
Kind of related to that, the general, his name is Layers, at least in the book, and he was ultimately arrested after the war ended. He was put in prison for a period of time, and he was prosecuted at Nuremberg and gave testimony against Albert Speers, who was one of the high-ranking German officers, and then they just let him go.
Interesting.
They just let him go. He's in there for a while, but after his trial, they let him go. And the author described this as what they refer to as the Italian Nuremberg, and kind of the notion was that they just, you know, at some point at Nuremberg, they got tired of trying people, and it just kind of dwindled away. And so this guy ends up buying.
That's weird to think about.
Yeah, this guy ends up buying a huge villa and living the rest of his life and with his family and so forth, even though he'd been involved in these atrocities. And of course, he did what all the high-ranking generals did. He said, I simply was following orders. I didn't know what was really happening, but clearly he did know what was happening.
That's fascinating. That aspect alone, that makes so much sense that it would happen, that public interest would wane, that but you think about something as important as the Nuremberg trials and consider the world just kind of losing interest in it. I mean, like I say, it makes sense that would happen, but that seems so, but that's why I like stories like this in a way, even if liberties have been taken, if there are stretches of what was true, sometimes exposing people to history in a fictional narrative is a really compelling way to do it. As long as they don't, you know, change any major outcomes or this era in general. I'm curious what your theory is on this, but I was thinking ahead of our hour today, you know, with the themes of this book, and I was kind of wondering in my head, there's something about this era that has generated more of this type of thing, more novels, more alternate histories, science fiction even, but also more nonfiction, more and understandably, this was a really important time in history for a lot of not so great reasons, mostly. But there's something that draws us back to that. And any time a book is published, it's a bestseller.
Yeah. Well, there was a lot of intrigue. There's a book out right now called The Traitor and the Spy.
I saw that on the
in fact, I've got that on hold at the Logan Library.
Really?
It's a true story about a person who was a double agent and what happened. But the story, there's so much intrigue going on. There's so much these classic situations of people risking their lives and so forth.
Sure.
I think that's part of the interest in it.
And it wouldn't be, this book by no means is the first time that we've had a kind of fictionalized version of true events. There was a movie recently with I think Brad Pitt was in it. There was it was Matt Damon. There was a whole group of people, and it's the story of it basically is a movie that leads up to the attempt on Hitler's life. They attempt to blow up the meeting.
Valkyrie?
Yeah. And that was, I knew enough of that history to know they took some major liberties, but I loved it, every second of it.
And that's an incredible story because they would have killed Hitler, but unfortunately they put the bomb next to this huge table leg that blunted most of the force.
Basically saved Hitler's life.
Yeah. Hitler... It's hard to say this, but Hitler for a while lived a charmed life because there were many attempts on his life, and for one reason or another, they just didn't happen.
That is.
I watched a movie today. It's on Netflix that I recommend to people. It's called The Edge of War.
Oh.
And it's the story of when Neville Chamberlain went to Germany and met with Hitler and basically said, "You can have Czechoslovakia. Don't worry about it. Just don't do anything else, okay?" And Hitler said, "Sure, I'm done. Once I do that, I'm finished."
That is...
It's a great movie.
That Edge of War. I'm making note of that because speaking of all of this, it's funny you mentioned that. I just started... family members have been recommending this to me forever, but it's not... I've never been one to really get that wrapped into British royalty, but I love the history of some of this, and so I finally started watching... I know I'm years behind on this, but I finally started watching The Crown on Netflix, and John Lithgow's crotchety old Churchill is currently one of my absolute favorite things that I've seen.
Actor.
Because you forget there was this time. There's Churchill from the same era as this Underneath the Scarlet Sky novel, and there's Churchill, and then there's Churchill in his latter years when he was just he was so cynical about government. He was so tired of politicians. He was, and yet he was still there. He's considered a man of the state at this point, a real decision maker, even though he didn't hold a position of power really any longer. And he was sick of everybody.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to think about that as time progresses from these monumental moments in history, decisions that Churchill made that you hate to think of. Had things gone otherwise, had he made a different decision, what could have been different in our global history?
What's the? I think it's a Netflix series that posits what would happen if the Nazis had won. It's called Castle on Hill. That's not right.
Yeah.
Is that the name of it?
Yeah.
But it's an alternative history.
Man in the High Castle.
Yeah, Men in the High Castle.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
That is. Which interesting. I didn't know this when I watched it at the time, but it's written by the man who wrote the short story that became Blade Runner with Harrison Ford and that popular sci-fi franchise. But that's, to me, this whole era is so intriguing. So I'm sure to pick this book up despite the reservations. But you and I had talked a little bit, though, about being a little shy about some of these things due to... I forget the name. I had to Google it. It was a book called Stones into Schools about this nonprofit that would go over and build schools in Afghanistan. Fascinating book, all fake. There was another one called A Million Pieces of Light or something about a man's travel through drug addiction into getting clean and all fake. Made the whole thing. And so there have been a couple of high-profile nonfiction books over the last few years. So I do approach some things, but I'm actually comfortable when they're saying right up front, this is a novel.
Think about this, too. If there are inaccuracies, what's the source of inaccuracy? It could be Mark Sullivan, or it could be that you've got Pino Lela, who's old, recounting events long after they happen, but also wanting to aggrandize himself. So maybe what Mark Sullivan wrote is exactly what he was told, but maybe it's the Pino who embellished the events. And his father, his family have kind of verified what he said. But again, they have a reason for doing that. For example, his eldest son has made a career out of kind of doing seminars about his dad.
Yeah.
And so they have a vested interest in perpetuating the image.
Sure. And that itself would be... Now I kind of want there to be a nonfiction book about the production of this fiction, of this novel. Yeah. It's fascinating to me, and I look forward to reading this. And again, the author is based out of Bozeman, Montana. His name's Mark Sullivan. He's written a few books and had good fortune with all of them as far as sales go. But this was his biggest hit, Underneath a Scarlet Sky. And you mentioned that the title was chosen because they thought it would appeal to other, fans of other genres, romance novels and more. Is there a meaning to that becomes... Yeah. Beneath the Scarlet Sky. The Scarlet Sky is a sky where there's impending doom, where there's an impending weather event. Okay. So kind of the notion is that terrible things are going to happen. That's... man. This is fascinating stuff, and I look forward to reading it. Listeners out there, you can get this everywhere, local bookstores, online, and more. Beneath a Scarlet Sky by Mark Sullivan is published in 2017, about to be a movie starring Tom Holland. Fiction, a novel based on true events and a real person who's still alive, actually, at 96, living in Milan, Italy. Our guest has been Craig Petersen, joining us for the People Book Club. Craig, always a pleasure to have you in. Listeners, always a pleasure to have you tuning in. Please stay tuned, though. In just a few minutes, we shift gears here on KVNU into Aggie Game Day with Al Lewis right after this.
Ah, that's better. Trade in the stresses of building a new home for relaxation. Visionary Homes Priority is giving you a stress-free building experience. Named the best home builder in northern Utah, Visionary Homes team will guide you seamlessly through the home building process. Call today, 435-228-4702, or visit visionaryhomes.com to learn more about upcoming communities in Nibley, Logan, and Smithfield. Visionary Homes, built for living, built for you.
Cache County homeowners, do you have a wood-burning stove or fireplace? Have Chim Chimney and Logan replace it with a gas insert or stove to receive a $2,800 to $4,000 state grant. Sign up now at stoves.utah.gov to receive an application. You can find out more about the program at chimchimney.com or by calling 435-755-9990. That's Chim Chimney in Logan and Brigham City. They sell, service, and install.
Wednesday edition, Clay Travis and Buck Sexton Show will break down the latest on COVID restrictions, the continued fallout surrounding Whoopi Goldberg and Joe Rogan. Plus,
we're going to have Arizona Senate candidate Blake Masters on to talk about the border and what the Biden administration's unwilling to do to secure it, how it affects the economy and everything else in this country. Plus, our friend Ned Ryan from Northern Virginia on the fight over masks in schools. We'll talk about that on the Clay Travis and Buck Sexton Show.
10 to 1 on News Talk KVNU, 102 FM at 610 AM.
Hey, it's me, your cell phone. We need to talk about something serious. I know you love me, I know you like using me wherever you are, but I feel like this isn't working out when you're driving. I know you may think that it's possible to focus both on me and the road, but I just don't feel the same way. I think we should spend time away from each other when you're driving. It's for the best.
Visit StopTextStopWrecks.org, a message brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, Project Yellow Light, and the Ad Council.
New federal guidelines have nearly doubled the number of Americans eligible for lung cancer screening. Insurance companies are required to cover these tests for those ages 50 to 80 who currently smoke or used to smoke. Along with new treatments, lung cancer screening saves lives. If you are 50 to 80 years old and smoke or used to smoke, talk to your doctor about lung cancer screening. For more information and to find a screening center near you, visit the National Lung Cancer Roundtable at nlcrt.org.
The Alzheimer's Association and the Ad Council present the story of Tom and Levi.
Tom is the smartest man I know. He's been a professor at 2 major universities, been a teacher for over 40 years. One day, he told me that he was having problems in his classes. I think one of the students had asked the question and he didn't remember the answer. And I also noticed that he was letting his class out earlier than they were supposed to let out. And he was telling them that he was doing it as a favor to them, but I think in reality he just wanted to get out of there. I was really starting to worry because I saw something was wrong.
Levi and I talked about how it would change our lives, but he was there beside me, and my love for him was just immense.
When something feels different, it could be Alzheimer's. Now is the time to talk. Visit alz.org/ourstories to learn more. A message from the Alzheimer's Association and the Ad Council.
News at the top and bottom of the hour. News Talk KVNU, Logan, 610 AM at 102.1 FM. Proud to be locally owned and operated